1. Imagine a world where the most recognizable voice on the planet belongs to a woman whom nobody truly knows. For over 4 decades, Enya has stood as a monumental figure in global music, selling upwards of 80 million albums and securing her legacy as Ireland's most successful musical export. Yet while her peers were busy navigating the treacherous waters of tabloid fame, stadium tour, and the relentless machinery of celebrity culture, Enya made a radical, almost impossible choice. She retreated. She constructed a life behind the cold, stone walls of a Victorian castle, effectively shielding her personal existence from the prying eyes of a public that desperately wanted to consume her life as much as her art. This wasn't merely a marketing tactic or a carefully curated act of exclusivity. It was a profound, calculated detachment from the very industry that made her rich. To understand Enya, we must look past the ethereal melodies and examine the woman who viewed the spotlight not as a destination, but as a genuine threat to her creative soul. 2. Long before the Grammys and the chart-topping records, there was Eithne Ní Bhraonáin, a child of the Gweedore region in County Donegal. Her upbringing was a masterclass in musical immersion, surrounded by a family where instruments were as common as conversation. The Brennan household was a chaotic, beautiful, and loud environment, yet young Ethan was the anomaly, the quiet observer who preferred the stillness of piano keys to the roar of family gatherings. This inclination toward solitude was the bedrock of her character, and it would eventually dictate the trajectory of her professional life. While her family members were extroverted performers, finding their groove in the folk scene, Ethan was already dreaming of soundscapes that didn't exist yet. She wasn't just learning music, she was learning how to build a private universe, a skill that would later baffle every record label executive who tried to force her into the standard pop star mold. 3. By the time the late 1970s arrived, the Irish folk scene was buzzing with the energy of Clannad, the family band that had become an undeniable force. Ethan, known now as Enya, stepped into this world with a sense of reluctance that never truly left her. Touring Europe was meant to be the dream, but for her it felt like a costume that didn't quite fit. She stood on stages in Germany and the Netherlands, performing traditional folk arrangements, all while her mind was elsewhere. She wasn't satisfied with playing the music of the past. She was obsessed with the possibilities of the future. She felt suffocated by the rigid structures of the band, where her creative contributions were limited by the collective vision. This was the first major tension point of her career, the moment she realized that if she wanted to create the sounds echoing in her head, she would have to abandon the safety of her family's success and walk an entirely lonely, unmapped path. 4. The turning point arrived with the entry of Nicky and Roma Ryan into her life. This wasn't just a professional collaboration, it was a fundamental shift in her existence. Nicky Ryan possessed the unique ability to listen to Enya's vision without trying to fix it into something commercial. He saw that she didn't want to be a folk singer or a pop star, she wanted to be an architect of atmosphere. Together they began to experiment with the wall of sound concept, but they applied it through the lens of Enya's voice. They didn't want a choir of 50 people, they wanted one voice layered hundreds of times, creating a singular supernatural texture. This obsession with precision was born in a makeshift studio in a shed, far away from the glitz of London or Lowe's Angels. It was a humble, almost ascetic beginning for someone who would soon be known as the Queen of New Age, ethereal sound. 5. Leaving Clannad in 1982 was more than just a business decision. It was a family rupture. In the tight-knit culture of Irish music, her departure was whispered about as a betrayal, cold move by a young woman who had walked away from the ladder her family had spent years building. But Enya was uninterested in the politics of gossip. She moved to Dublin and essentially bet her entire life on the belief that her unique sonic vision would eventually reach a global audience. These were years of extreme financial fragility. She wasn't living in a castle yet, she was giving piano lessons and scoring small, obscure documentaries just to keep the dream alive. It is crucial to understand that her mystery wasn't a PR move, it was a necessity of survival. When you're betting your entire life on a sound that no one else understands, the only thing you have left to protect is your focus. 6. The breakthrough with the BBC for the Celts soundtrack is often overlooked, but it was the catalyst that changed everything. For the first time, Enya was given total creative autonomy. No executives, no bandmates, and no market research to tell her how her music should sound. She took the orchestral textures, the synthesizers, and her signature multi-tracked vocals, and fused them with the Celtic roots she had tried so hard to escape in her youth. This project wasn't just a soundtrack, it was a baptism. It proved that her vision was not only viable but breathtakingly beautiful. The transition from a struggling artist in a shed to an international sensation wasn't a gradual climb, it was a sudden tectonic shift that caught even the most seasoned industry veterans off guard. The world was about to be introduced to Watermark. 7. When Watermark was released, it defied every conventional rule of the late 80s music industry. There was no aggressive marketing, no touring, and absolutely no hit formula to be found. The single Orinoco Flow was by all accounts a disaster waiting to happen. It was a song about sailing away, void of a traditional chorus built upon rhythmic layers that didn't adhere to the high-energy demands of MTV. Yet the song exploded. It topped the charts in the UK and crossed the Atlantic with ease. Enya had done the impossible. She had forced the world to come to her rather than changing her music to suit the world. This moment of massive commercial success is where most artists lose themselves, but Enya did the exact opposite. She retreated further into the shadows, proving that her primary goal was never fame, it was the continued, uninterrupted pursuit of her craft. 8. The reaction of the music industry to Enya's silence was one of total befuddled frustration. Warner Music executives, accustomed to artists who would do anything for a billboard placement, simply didn't know what to do with a woman who refused to go on tour. They wanted a brand, she gave them a mystery. They wanted interviews, she gave them albums. This dissonance created a myth around her that grew with every passing year. Because she didn't provide the public with the usual behind-the-scenes content, fans and tabloids filled the gaps with their own narratives. She was the recluse, the ghost in the castle, the eccentric woman who preferred cats to people. But this myth was just a protective shell. Enya understood something that most celebrities don't. If you give the public too much of yourself, you lose the ability to create anything that feels truly sacred or personal. 9. As the 1990s and 2000s wore on, Enya's career turned into a consistent record-breaking phenomenon. Shepherd Moon's The Memory of Trees Asterisk and A Day Without Rain were not just albums, they were experiences. People didn't just listen to Enya, they used her music to escape, to heal, and to find comfort in a world that was becoming increasingly fractured. The use of Only Time after the 9/11 tragedy is the ultimate testament to this. It wasn't a choice made by a label executive to sell records, it was an organic connection made by a grieving public who found solace in her voice. When she donated the proceeds to the families of firefighters, she did it with the same quiet dignity that defined her entire career. She didn't seek the PR boost, she simply offered the only thing she knew how to give: peace through sound. 10. However, the darker side of fame began to claw its way into her sanctuary. Being a mystery is one thing, but being a target is another. The stalker incidents in the mid-90s were a harsh reality check. People obsessed with the idea of her wanted to possess the person behind the voice. When a stranger broke into Manderley Castle and terrorized her staff, the fantasy of the secluded artist vanished, replaced by the terrifying reality of vulnerability. Enya hid in a panic room for hours, an experience that would have driven most people to walk away from public life entirely. For Enya, it solidified her belief that boundaries were not optional, they were essential. She realized that the more famous she became, the more she had to fight to maintain the basic human right to be safe in one's own home. 11. Her perspective on relationships and marriage has often been criticized or viewed as cold, but it is actually deeply insightful. She has spoken about the fear of losing her creative identity to the demands of a partner or a family. This isn't because she lacks the capacity for love, it is because she understands the level of commitment required to produce her specific kind of music. Her recording process, layering hundreds of vocal tracks, spending years on a single album, is a form of total psychological immersion. To be that invested in an internal world often means you have little energy left for the external one. When she called the idea of marriage horrific, she wasn't attacking the institution, she was identifying the death of her creative process that would surely follow. For Enya, music was not a job, it was an all-consuming devotion. 12. By the time she reached her 60s, Enya had become a legend in the truest sense of the word. Her silence between album releases had become an accepted part of her brand, even though she never explicitly branded it. Younger audiences who grew up in the digital age began discovering her through samples in hip-hop and rap. Hearing her ethereal, layered vocals cut through the hard-hitting beats of the Fugees or modern tracks by The Weeknd and Metro Boomin is a testament to the timeless nature of her sound. She wasn't just a new-age artist, she was an architect of atmosphere whose work was fundamentally versatile. She had become an accidental pioneer, influencing genres she probably never even listened to, all while remaining firmly tucked away in her castle in Killiney. 13. The years between 2016 and 2026 brought a series of profound losses that would test anyone's resolve. The passing of her father, Leo, and her brother, Leon, were heavy blows that forced her to confront the reality of time, the very theme she had explored so often in her music. The death of her sister, Moya, in 2026 was the final, devastating piece of a decade defined by grief. Despite the old rumors of tension after she left Clannad, the truth was that the Brennan family remained a core part of her identity. These losses stripped away the myth of Enya and revealed the human, a woman who, like everyone else, was dealing with the brutal, linear passage of life while trying to maintain the sanctuary she had built for herself. 14. The passing of Nicky Ryan in 2025 was perhaps the most significant structural change to her career. For over 40 years, he was the bridge between Enya the person and Enya the performer. He was the one who translated her vision into sound, who shielded her from the pressures of the industry, and who understood that her silence was her strength. Losing him wasn't just losing a producer, it was losing the last true partner in her creative life. Many fans rightfully wondered if this was the end. If the man who helped define her entire sonic identity was gone, could the Enya sound continue? Yet, even in this loss, the resilience that has defined her life remained clear. She had built a foundation that was designed to withstand the tides of time, even when the key players began to fade. 15. What is the takeaway from Enya's career? If we look at the facts, the massive sales, the awards, the samples, the influence, it is easy to view it as a success story. But that is the surface view. The documentary view reveals something much more interesting. Enya is the ultimate case study in the power of boundaries. She managed to achieve the highest level of fame while actively sabotaging the mechanisms of fame that usually destroy an artist. She didn't want the stadium tour, she didn't want the reality show life, she didn't want the constant public presence. She recognized that her creativity was a finite resource and she spent every ounce of it protecting that resource. She chose to be a mystery, not to manipulate her audience but to keep her own voice clean of the world's noise. 16. Even today, the speculation about her next album continues. Every few years, whispers emerge from people in her circle that she is still at work, still layering her voice, still experimenting with the textures that made her famous. At 63, Enya doesn't have anything to prove to the industry. She has already secured her place in the canon of music history. Any music she releases now is not for the charts or the executives or the legacy, it is for her. The fact that the world still waits, still listens, and still finds beauty in her work proves that she was right all along. By choosing to prioritize her peace over the public's demand for her, she ensured that her art would never be diluted. 17. There is a lesson here for the modern creator, especially in an age of constant oversharing and social media fatigue. We are taught that we must be accessible to be relevant. Enya proves that you can be completely inaccessible and still be legendary. You don't need to post every day to stay relevant, you just need to produce something that matters. Her career is a rebuke to the influencer culture that demands constant engagement. She showed the world that it is possible to disappear into your work and emerge with something that resonates with millions. Her mystery is not a wall, it is a mirror. We look at her and we see our own desire for peace, our own longing for a space that is truly ours, untouched by the opinions of others. 18. As we reflect on her story, it becomes clear that Enya was never strange. She was disciplined. The strangeness was simply a society unable to understand a woman who was entirely, unapologetically, and authentically herself. She refused to play the game, and because she refused, the game had to change to accommodate her. She proved that you don't have to sacrifice your humanity to become a global icon. You don't have to lose yourself in the process of becoming something bigger. In fact, she showed that the only way to stay big is to keep your core protected. 19. Today, Enya remains a testament to the idea that silence is as much a part of music as the notes themselves. The spaces between her chords, the pauses in her career, and the years of her absence are all part of the composition. She taught us that an artist is not a product to be consumed. An artist is a person who creates a world for others to visit. And by living so completely within that world, she has managed to touch the lives of people she will never meet. Her legacy is not found in the number of records sold, but in the millions of people who, for a few minutes while listening to her music, find a place where they, too, can be quiet. 20. So as we look back at the journey of Eithne Ní Bhraonáin, we find that the mystery was never really a mystery at all. It was a choice to live a life that made sense to her even if it didn't make sense to the rest of the world. She did not chase fame and yet she caught it. She did not seek to be an icon and yet she became one. Most importantly, she never lost the quiet girl from Donegal. She stayed true to that voice in the chaos, and in doing so, she provided the world with the soundtrack